What happened in 1953 in Iran is often referred to by the Western media as a military coup to topple the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. Hello, this is Persian History, and today we are going to talk about the so-called 1953 coup d'etat in Iran. As I already mentioned, it has become conventional wisdom that in 1953, the United States CIA led a coup to overthrow the then Prime Minister of Iran, Mossadegh, for nationalizing the British-owned oil industry in Iran, and that many of the US problems with the current Iranian government stem from this coup. Even former President Barack Obama spreads this lie. Hollywood has also repeated it many times, as demonstrated by the popular movie Argo. First, technically, there was no coup. By definition, a coup d'etat is a sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government. Was this the case in Iran? Absolutely not. Mossadegh was the Prime Minister of Iran, and as such, under the constitution then in place, he could legally be removed by the Shah. And the Shah did indeed dismiss Mossadegh. In fact, it was Mossadegh who staged a coup to seize power. The only unconstitutional behavior came from Mossadegh himself, who refused to step down and ordered the arrest of the officers who delivered the Shah's notice of his dismissal, leading to the creation of a military dictatorship under Mossadegh. Second, the CIA was not the driving force behind Mossadegh's removal on August 19. There is a rumor that one CIA agent in his biography allegedly took credit for the protests that eventually led to Mossadegh's removal. But declassified documents from the CIA demonstrate just the opposite. During the crisis, the CIA station in Tehran reported the anti-Mossadegh protest contained a large element of spontaneity, and there seemed to have been a genuine reaction of shock and dismay on part of the Tehran populace when the Shah left Iran for Iraq. The CIA station also admitted 2 days before Mossadegh's removal that the CIA cut out of military preparations by General Batman Gelich and Zahedi. In fact, the CIA was unaware that Mossadegh was being removed at all, and they were very surprised that anti-Mossadegh forces were taking control over Tehran. The CIA acting director Charles Cabell briefed President Eisenhower that an unexpected strong upsurge of popular and military reaction to Prime Minister Mossadegh's government has resulted, according to late dispatches from Tehran, in the virtual occupation of that city by forces proclaiming their loyalty to the Shah and to his appointed Prime Minister Zahedi. Third, not only was the CIA unaware that Mossadegh was being removed on August 19, but they expected Mossadegh to remain in power for the next 2 months. They ceased all activities against him and even considered working with him. Mossadegh's illegal government was in fact overthrown 3 days after the CIA's failed attempt on August 16. Wow, so if one can speak of a coup at all, then Mossadegh's removal was a direct response to an anti-constitutional coup staged by Mossadegh. 69 years ago, on August 19, 1953, the resurrection of the Iranian nation took place. While on one hand, Mossadegh's supporters called that day the American destruction of Iran's last chance to become prosperous, Mossadegh opponents, however, celebrate this day and call it the liberation of Iran from the tyranny of one of Iran's wealthiest feudal landlords and reactionaries. Wait, feudal landlord? Reactionary? No way. Wasn't Mossadegh a progressive, self-made man who fought for freedom? I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that is not true. Mossadegh was a descendant of the Turkic Qajars who had occupied Iran and imposed their brutal dictatorship on the Iranian people for almost 200 years. Owning huge estates through forged papers, Mossadegh was a wealthy landlord and eventually married a Qajar princess and was given the office of a provincial finance minister. Within just 10 years, he became one of Iran's richest landowners, totally via his merit and not at all because of his relations and positions of power. Mossadegh was anti-democratic and always sided with the tyrannical Qajar aristocracy. He was an opponent of the democratic movement in Iran and back then you could already see his unpatriotic behavior when he sided with Muhammad Ali Shah Qajar to torpedo Iran back from a parliamentary monarchy to an absolute monarchy. Even after the restoration of the constitution in 1909, Mossadegh still defended the unpopular Qajar dynasty, and during Reza Khan's seizure of power, he was rightly put in prison for treason. Ironically, Mossadegh was freed from jail by the young Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom he later betrayed as well, as we are going to see in this video. Mossadegh was not a man of progress. He had never realized how important it was to industrialize Iran and longed back to the good old days when Western technology had not yet begun to change the world. He was strongly opposed to the construction of railways and argued that Iranians did not need railways, roads or ports. There was no need to travel. It would be much more comfortable to stay at home. What do we expect from a man who receives state guests in pyjamas in his bedroom? During his term as Prime Minister, Mossadegh exploited the oil dispute with Britain to slowly establish a dictatorship in Iran. Mossadegh violated the constitution and dissolved the Senate, the Kurds, and the parliament after it expressed the will to impeach him. Eventually, he received his letter of dismissal by the Shah, but refused to resign and launched a full-on military coup d'etat. Yeah, what a democrat. The Shah seeing this left the country to give the Iranians the freedom to choose between Mossadegh and him. The Iranians chose him, as we are going to see in this video. Mossadegh's increasing anti-constitutional authoritarianism was initially tolerated by the Iranians, who saw it as a necessary evil to nationalize the oil industry. But when it became clear that Mossadegh wanted to overthrow the parliamentary monarchy, the masses mobilized and occupied Tehran, declaring their loyalty to the Shah and his appointed Prime Minister Zahedi. And when Mossadegh sent the army to restore order, the army sided with the people and the constitution. Despite all the documents mentioned, there is not the slightest hint of a massive CIA involvement in the overthrow of Mossadegh on August 19th. Yet, professional historical revisionists, well organized in universities and the media, constantly stress the opposite. The most prominent of these historical revisionists being Ervand Abrahamian and Malcolm Byrne. First, let's look at Mr. Abrahamian. In his book Coup d'etat, Abrahamian claims that the plans for the events of the 19th of August were implemented after the meeting between US Ambassador Lloyd Henderson and Mossadegh on August 18th, one day before the overthrow. But if we check the CIA reports on that specific day, we not only see that the CIA had no plans or predictions for that day, but that the United States was even preparing for a compromise with Mossadegh. Let's look at his character for a moment. Abrahamian is not only a sympathizer of the Islamic Republic, justifying their rule as an inevitable response to American imperialism, but he is also a sympathizer of the past terrorist Tudeh party in Iran. In his interview with Fariba Amini on August 18, 2020, he described the Tudeh party as follows. The Tudeh party was actually a nationalist party with leftist tendencies. A nationalist party. Let this description melt in your mouth. For everyone who does not know, the Tudeh party was a communist party founded by the USSR during the Soviet occupation of Iran in 1941. They were one of the most active parties who continuously worked towards the overthrow of the Pahlavi dynasty and with it the destruction of the Iranian state. In 1944, the Tudeh party entered Iranian parliament where they supported the Soviet policies in Iran without protest. The Tudeh party not only supported Moscow's plans to balkanize northern Iran, but also held its fourth plenum in Moscow under the direct supervision of the Soviet Union. Now, imagine someone who describes the treacherous Marxist-Leninist Tudeh party as a nationalist party being an Iran expert, let alone being a credible historian. Having ticked off Mr. Abrahamian, let's proceed to the other history forger, Malcolm Byrne. Since 2013, various individuals and media outlets have repeatedly referenced a website and fake headline that has nothing to do with the CIA to prove that the CIA acknowledged its role on August 19. This website is linked to the Washington State University and has absolutely no ties to the CIA. The fact that the CIA's official website has never admitted to playing a role in Mossadegh's overthrow just proves that this headline is made up and backed by no evidence. This so-called the National Security Archive website is run by journalists and masquerades as a government site. The map you can see here was designed by Ali Rahnama, one of Mossadegh's admirers 60 years after Mossadegh's removal. It has been inserted into the release document so that the viewer believes that this was part of a pre-arranged CIA plan to attack Mossadegh's house. The funniest thing about this article with the fake headline CIA Confession is the use of pictures with the watermark of the Institute for the Study of Contemporary History of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I wonder how secret the CIA documents must be if even the Islamic Republic of Iran has access to them. It is also interesting to note that in this article, in which Malcolm Byrne claims to have published documents on the role of the CIA on August 19, his second document proves the opposite. It states that the CIA admitted the nationalists and communists during this period inadvertently assisted our cause through their premature attempts to promote a republican government. This theme was contrary to the public's opinion, whose sympathies were with the Shah. The Shah's dramatic flight out of the country served to further intensify his people's sense of loyalty to him. This action resulted in literal revolt of the population. To sum it up, Malcolm Byrne, who wrote this fake article, is not representative of the CIA and was never authorized to comment on their behalf. The goal of the National Front since its foundation by Mossadegh was the overthrow of Iran's parliamentary monarchy and the abolition of its constitution to establish a republic, although not everyone within the National Front was subscribed to this. One could say that Mossadegh's National Front was in fact the legal continuation of the communist Tudeh party, which had been declared illegal after a failed assassination attempt on the Shah of Iran. While the National Front championed Mossadegh's authoritarianism in parliament, the Tudeh party organized violent demonstrations in the streets. Both parties were working hand in hand to abolish Iran's constitutional monarchy. Mossadegh was, contrary to circulating claims, not a democratically elected prime minister. The Iranian constitution did not provide for free elections of the prime minister, but for the Shah to appoint and remove the prime minister. And when in 1952 the parliament refused to grant Mossadegh additional powers, Mossadegh got enraged and immediately resigned. So you didn't receive emergency powers and decided to throw a tantrum? Very major. Ahmad Qavam became the next prime minister but was met with massive protests from Mossadegh's supporters, especially the Tudeh party, demanding the resignation of Ahmad Qavam. The Shah, to avoid a civil war, reinstated Mossadegh as prime minister, and the parliament was forced to accept Mossadegh's demands for further emergency powers, which empowered him to rule the country by decree. After the overthrow of Mossadegh's government, subsequent interrogations of traitors proved that most of Mossadegh's followers were Tudehi communists who wanted to use Mossadegh to overthrow the Pahlavi dynasty and then to take control over Iran and establish a republic. It is said that they were already planning to proclaim a republic on February 20, 1953, when they heard that the Shah had to go abroad on a medical trip, but failed since the Iranians, fearing Mossadegh would overthrow the monarchy in the Shah's absence, organized demonstrations demanding the Shah to stay. On that day, the Shah made the following remarks. Despite the fact that my illness has been forcing me to travel abroad for a long time, and despite the fact that I wanted to visit the holy sites in Iraq today and then travel to Europe for treatment, I decided to cancel because I see that you demand my presence here. I have no choice but to postpone my trip for the time being. Of course, like everyone else in this country, I have a duty to fulfill and accept the demands of the people. And if the people do not want me to travel and be treated, I will have to cancel this trip. Contrary to what is reported by the leftist media, we don't see here the image of a cruel despot, but the image of a dutiful king loved by his people. The leftist media, who likes to call the Shah of Iran a puppet of the West, should read the following CIA report on the Shah. The Shah has vivacity, imagination, and wit, tempered with a deep sense of personal dignity and almost mystical feeling of his mission and duty to Iran. The Shah identifies himself strongly with the Iranian army, considering himself a qualified strategist and tactician. Devoting a great deal of his private fortune on charities, his popularity is now much greater than at his accession. Were he to make himself absolute dictator on the model of his father, the Iranian people would acquiesce. But his attachment to democratic principles prevents such a step. These are the CIA's own words. The CIA would have to be very stupid to use such a patriotic man to exploit Iran. What many do not realize, the Shah did not oppose Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil industry. On the contrary, the Shah and Mossadegh were on the same page regarding this issue. The problem, however, was that even though the Shah had given Mossadegh every opportunity to develop a constructive oil policy, Mossadegh was unable to lead a constructive policy, sank into destructiveness, depression, and instead blamed the Shah for his failures. What a jerk! Even his own party members had begun to criticize him. Thereupon Mossadegh made the parliament incorrect by forbidding his supporters to participate. Whoever resisted was beaten up by his gangs. Due to the oil shortages and the resulting enormous economic problems caused by his populist economic policies, Mossadegh had several $millions worth of money printed without sufficient gold backing, which caused high inflation. Does this sound familiar to you? Mossadegh had moved closer to the Tudeh party in his second term. He was working closely with them and simultaneously infiltrated the imperial army with Tudehi communists. By mid-1953, however, the Iranians had realized that the goal of Mossadegh's oil policy was to drive the British out of the country so that the Soviets could move in, and so the unity between the Shah, Mossadegh, and the parliament that had prevailed at the beginning of the confrontations with the British was now broken. Yes, the Americans wanted to overthrow Mossadegh, and they did try. But the point is that they failed miserably, and then tried to mend relations with him, as we will see. Eventually, the Iranians did the job on their own. The name Operation Ajax that has gone down in history was actually TP Ajax. TP for the Communist Tudeh Party and Ajax for the cleaner Ajax. Although Mossadegh was not a communist himself, he often enlisted their support. The communists in Iran were the main source of Mossadegh's power, and the Americans feared a communist takeover if Mossadegh would remain in power. Both the Tudeh Party as well as Mossadegh hated the Pahlavi dynasty. Cooperation with the Tudeh Party suited Mossadegh well, who had a personal vendetta with the Pahlavi dynasty for deposing the previous Qajar dynasty to whom he was related to. Furthermore, for the Tudeh Party, Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil industry was an important step towards a socialist Iran. On June 10, 1953, the Soviet Union and Iran signed a new economic agreement. In further negotiations, the Soviet Union offered to return Iranian gold reserves. It had seized during World War II, border issues were to be settled in Iran's favor, and the Soviet-Iranian Friendship Treaty of 1921 was to be renegotiated. This, of course, worried the Americans, who expected a communist takeover if Mossadegh was not to be stopped. After all, the Tudeh Party was very well organized in Iran and had built a secret network of middlemen in politics, the army, and even the Shah's imperial guard. In fact, the very same scenario took place in Czechoslovakia not too long ago. Anatoly Lavrentiev, the man who was the Soviet ambassador to Iran, had also been the Soviet ambassador to Czechoslovakia in 1948, and he had played an important role in the overthrow of the liberal president Dr. Benesh. Benesh, like Mossadegh, had been the head of a national front government. He had come under increasing Soviet pressure, so that at the end of his reign, the non-communist members of his government resigned and the communists took power. During his 3 years in office, Mossadegh had not managed to reach an agreement with the British on the nationalization of their oil refineries. The Americans, who up to then had only played a mediating role, between Britain and Iran and were giving large amounts of loans to Mossadegh, were now facing a dilemma. On the one hand, the US did not want to finance Mossadegh's insane policies, but on the other hand, they had to finance Mossadegh's regime so that Iran would not further drive into the hands of the communists. To solve this issue, the United States decided to support the anti-Mossadegh coalition in Iran, who had formed because of Mossadegh's ever-increasing despotic rule and disastrous economic policies. The solution was finally Operation TP Ajax. The plan was to create a pro-Western government and at the same time to prevent the Tudeh party, which was under the control of the Soviet Union, from coming to power. And thus the United States sent CIA agent Kermit Roosevelt to meet with resistance leader General Zahedi, a man who owned large estates and was considered a strict anti-communist. Zahedi was a man who had initially supported Mossadegh's National Front, but had fallen out with Mossadegh because, unlike Mossadegh, he was against a cooperation with the communists. After his breakup with Mossadegh, Zahedi became a member of the Committee of the Salvation of the Fatherland, Comité Nejat Vatan, also called Committee of 46, a resistance movement among Iranian officers and civilians who wanted to restore the constitutional monarchy and save Iran from a communist takeover. General Zahedi was a patriotic Iranian, very anti-British, who was in fact interned by the British after their troops occupied Iran during World War II. The objective of Operation TP Ajax was to prevent Iran from falling behind the Iron Curtain and to stop the Tudeh party from taking power over Iran. TP Ajax was supposed to be a quasi-legal coup, that is, the Americans would bribe 20 parliament members so they would join the rest of the anti-Mossadegh opposition in parliament and dismiss him. Simultaneously, the Shah would appoint Zahedi as chief of staff. Then Parliament would give a vote of confidence to him so that the Shah appoints Zahedi as the new Prime Minister. And if Parliament refuses to cooperate, the Shah should order the Imperial Guard to remove Mossadegh by force, and then Zahedi would emerge victorious and accept the decree of Prime Minister. TP Ajax was supposed to be carried out on August 16th, 3 days before Mossadegh's actual removal by the Iranian people, but failed because Mossadegh, who had heard about the plan to dismiss him as Prime Minister, launched a full-on military coup d'etat. TP Ajax, however, also failed to a large extent because the Shah refused to cooperate with the CIA. The Shah rejected all the plans, and no part of the plan could get operationalized. The Shah argued that he would dismiss Mossadegh only if he did something illegal, and that he would never go against the constitution he had sworn to keep. Mossadegh, on the other hand, violated the constitution on August 13, 1953, by dissolving the parliament through a silly show he called a referendum. Mossadegh's so-called referendum to abolish the parliament was held between August 3rd and August 10th. Mossadegh, the great Democrat for free elections, ordered that those who were against him had to vote in specially marked polling booths. The result was that 99% had voted for the dissolution of the parliament, because the population was afraid of Mossadegh's terror squads who systematically murdered those who voted against Mossadegh. It must also be said that many voters were basically illiterate peasants who didn't know what they were even voting for and therefore had no vote of their own. Thus, Mossadegh's referendum looked more like this.
General Aladdin won 98.8% of the vote.
Just to give you an idea how ridiculous this referendum was, in some towns where the population was around 3,000, there was a turnout of 600%. Had the dead also voted here? The Shah, who condemned this rigged referendum, wrote in his memoirs, Mossadegh's bulldozed elections had cost hundreds of people their lives. Mossadegh wanted to make himself the absolute dictator and had nothing else in his mind but to overthrow me and my dynasty. Accordingly, the Shah instructed Colonel Naseri, commander of the Imperial Guard, to bring Mossadegh the certificate of impeachment and General Zahedi the order to form a new government. With the dissolution of parliament, Mossadegh had given the Shah the right to remove him and replace him with another prime minister. According to the constitution, the Shah had the right to dismiss the prime minister after the dissolution of parliament and to replace him with an interim prime minister until new parliamentary elections were held. So much for the Shah being an unconstitutional dictator. Ergo, the Shah made it clear to the CIA that he would only remove Mossadegh legally, which he did. Therefore, the CIA did not play any significant role in the legal removal of the illegal government of the unelected dictator Mossadegh. In the Wilbur report, we also see that even though the United States and Britain repeatedly threaten the Shah that if he does not cooperate with them, they will end his reign, the Shah categorically rejects all offers and says that if Mossadegh holds a referendum to resolve the parliament, I will dismiss Mossadegh legally. In a meeting with US ambassador in May 1953, the Shah states emphatically that first, if Zahedi is to become prime minister, it must be through legal means, no coup. Secondly, if the new government does not receive financial and economic assistance caused by Mossadegh's disastrous policies, I would prefer Mossadegh to remain prime minister. What we see in these documents about the events that led to August 19 is the sincerity from the Shah, who, despite all the threats of the great powers in his youth, with dignity and courage, even at the cost of threatening his kingship and his life, does not undertake illegal action and respects the law and acts only where the constitution authorizes him. After TP Ajax failed, the US government decided to improve relations with Mossadegh, and the CIA orders Roosevelt to take no further actions. At this point, the Americans thought that Mossadegh was going to remain in power for about 2 months until the communists would oust him. And therefore, not only did the CIA cease activities against Mossadegh, but they even decided to support him following their failed plan to remove him. With the appointment of General Zahedi as the new prime minister on August 13th, Mossadegh was officially deposed and had to resign. However, he refused and launched a military coup on August 16, marking the beginning of his 3-day dictatorship. A year prior, on October 23, 1952, Mossadegh had dissolved the Senate. That was an important step because the Senate was responsible for reviewing and approving laws. And on August 3, 1953, Mossadegh was given the authority to take over the judicial and executive branches, just as today these 3 branches in Iran are under the direct supervision of the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Mossadegh abolished the separation and independence of the 3 powers, enabling the National Front to eliminate any other alternative in Iran to its rule, except of course the communists to their party. Mossadegh wanted to turn Iran into a Soviet-style republic. His goal was to replace the parliamentary monarchy in Iran with a republic and assume its presidency. In Egypt, for example, a republic had already been proclaimed on June 18, 1953, after King Farouk had been deposed through a coup d'etat by his own prime minister. Fearing a similar fate for Iran, most members of parliament turned against Mossadegh, including his closest allies. On August 13, 1953, Mossadegh, in collaboration with General Taghi Riyahi, drew up a detailed plan to overthrow the monarchy. Instead of accepting his dismissal order, Mossadegh should first declare that the army had revolted against him. Second, Mossadegh should order the arrest of senior officers of the army. Third, the Imperial Guard should be eliminated and the Shah should be put under house arrest. And then large demonstrations should be organized in Tehran, and the speakers of the National Front, the Pan-Iranists, and the Tudeh party should inform the people about the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic in Iran. At 1 o'clock in the morning on August 16, 1953, the Shah's decree, which had removed Mossadegh from the post of prime minister, was delivered to his house by Colonel Naseri, and Mossadegh was notified. But Mossadegh sent Naseri to the army headquarters where he was to be arrested. Mossadegh, now a dismissed prime minister, accused the army of making a coup and thereupon ordered General Riyahi to arrest the accompanying officers of Colonel Naseri. The Shah was called a dictator and General Riyahi was ordered to disband the Imperial Guard, arresting their officers and sending them to West Tehran to be dispersed among the brigades and divisions. Mossadegh also ordered the arrest and imprisonment of many high-ranking government and military officials without a warrant. And so the decree of Mossadegh's dismissal became the basis of the leftist propaganda from that moment until today. Now imagine Mossadegh, whose request of emergency powers were not accepted by the parliament, but was appointed prime minister nonetheless by the Shah, is being portrayed as the only democratically elected prime minister Iran ever had, while the Shah, who always adhered to the constitution, is constantly called a brutal dictator by the leftist media. How crazy is that? Yes, Mossadegh, who established an absolute dictatorship in Iran, is advertised by the leftist media to the entire world as a model for the struggle for democracy. A man who built Iran's first secret police, as well as many prisons, to detain his political opponents, has been branded by the leftist media as a fighter for political freedom. On August 16th, several army officers were arrested and a bounty of 100,000 riyals was set on the head of the Shah's appointed Prime Minister, General Zahedi, which was a lot of money back then in Iran. Adjusting inflation, with this sum you could have bought a 71 Mercedes in 1972. Mossadegh's first decision as dictator of Iran was to take command of the army, something that only the Shah was authorized to do under the constitution. Again, very democratic. At 6 a.m. on August 16, Mossadegh called the first cabinet of the so-called Mossadegh government to a meeting at his home to decide what this government would be like. A radio statement was broadcasted at 7 a.m. which stated that Mossadegh had assumed all the duties that were designated for the Shah in the constitution and declared that the constitution was invalid and ordered the removal of the name Shah throughout Iran. To legitimize his illegal government at 7 o'clock in the morning, Mossadegh ordered Bashir Farahmand, the head of the General Directorate of Propaganda, to read the government announcement twice that a coup had taken place by the army at 1 o'clock in the morning and on August 16th, but that the coup was foiled at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then Mossadegh ordered the seizure of the imperial palaces and then to arrest the Shah. What Mossadegh, however, did not suspect was that the Shah, who was outside Tehran, had left the country. The Shah, seeing Mossadegh refusing to step down and seeing him systematically arresting political opponents, immediately realized Mossadegh was doing a coup d'etat and decided to leave Iran in the early morning of August 16. In a statement, he declared that since he has sworn an oath to be the guardian of the constitution and of the law, and since he has noticed Mossadegh violating the constitution and that he wants to seize total power for himself, he decided to dismiss him. And seeing Mossadegh disobeying his orders, he decided to leave Iran temporarily to avoid a civil war and unnecessary bloodshed. I ask you, are these really the actions of a power-hungry dictator? Would a tyrant voluntarily leave the country to give the people the choice to freely decide who they want to follow? To arrest the Shah, Foreign Minister Hossein Fatemi sent a telegram to the Iranian ambassador in Baghdad. Embassy contact with those who fled the morning after the failed military coup without informing the government is not permitted in any way. At the Mossadegh government's cabinet meeting, it was decided that on the evening of August 16th, demonstrations by the Tudeh Party, the National Front, the Iran Party, the Third Force, and the Pan-Iranists would take place in Baharestan Square. They would announce the establishment of the so-called new government of Mossadegh and with it the abolition of the parliamentary monarchy. And so, an hour after noon, the Tudeh Party, the National Front, and the Pan-Iranists marched through the streets of Tehran towards Baharestan Square with red flags and hammers, chanting communist slogans to declare the establishment of a socialist republic under Mossadegh. The people of the capital trembled with fear and saw with their own eyes that the Soviet Union was literally seizing power in Iran. In the meantime, the Shah arrived in Baghdad airport and was well received by the Iraqi authorities, acknowledging him as Iran's head of state, despite Hossein Fatemi's propaganda. The Shah's departure, however, encouraged the Communist Tudeh Party to stage demonstrations in Tehran, chanting the slogan, "The Democratic Republic shall rise." During these pro-Mossadegh demonstrations, communist gangs, along with thugs and rioters, dispersed in the streets of Tehran and attacked people with stones and sticks, while looting shops and stores. And so the people's fear and concerns about the Soviet-backed Tudeh militants dominating the affairs of the country was growing. In Baghdad, the Shah told the Speaker of the Iraqi parliament that he hopes to return to Iran soon and that he has appointed General Zahedi as prime minister because Mossadegh was abusing his authority, and that General Zahedi did not stage a coup but that he merely informed Mossadegh of my order for his dismissal. The socialist forces of Mossadegh now had gathered at Baharestan Square, and as tapes of the demonstrations show, Fatemi declared the abolition of the monarchy and announced the establishment of the People's Democratic Republic. "We do not want a king," all the speakers said with the utmost ruthlessness and impudence, followed by a handful of traitors and ignorant people shouting, complete the task of the country. The demonstrations began with a speech by Jalali Musavi, a former member of the parliament. Then, Hossein Fatemi came behind the microphone and gave a speech. As the tapes show, which were later broadcasted in the trial of Mossadegh and General Riahi, Fatemi called the end of Iran's constitution and its parliamentary monarchy and declared the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Iran. And at the same time, Mossadegh's followers tore down the statue of Reza Shah in Bahorestan Square with a crane and then dragged down the remaining statues of the Pahlavi kings in Tehran. Mossadegh personally ordered his followers to tear down these statues. This was Mossadegh's message to the Iranian nation that there was no place for a Shah in his so-called Mossadegh government. You must realize that most things that happened on the orders of Mossadegh in this 3-day period from August 16 to August 19 were not spontaneous decisions, but they were rather based on a detailed plan, as Mossadegh and his accomplices confessed later in court. Abdul Qasim Amini, the guardsman of the royal court, was Mossadegh's cousin and simultaneously his spy, and he had informed Mossadegh in advance of the Shah's decision to dismiss him, therefore not making Mossadegh's violent seizure of power a mere reaction towards some attempted coup by the imperial guard, but a carefully planned betrayal. To US Ambassador Henderson, Mossadegh even told that while he doubted the authenticity of the royal decree dismissing him, it would not have mattered to him anyway, since he did not care about the Shah's opinion, which implies that Mossadegh was going to make a coup regardless of his legal dismissal. Mossadegh, however, had misjudged the situation. The people were not at all enthusiastic about the parade. They did not cheer the Marxist socialist takeover, but were horrified when they saw Mossadegh's communist supporters tearing down the statues of their king and defacing the statues of the father of the Iranian nation, Reza Shah. They knew full well what Mossadegh was intending to achieve. And so, on August 19, 1953, at 6 a.m., people took to the streets, and the uprising of the Iranians against Mossadegh's government began. It is ironic that the very idea to establish a republic in Iran was first considered by then Prime Minister and later King Reza Pahlavi. But the parliament and the Iranian people opposed this idea, arguing that Iran needs a Shah and that this is the culture and tradition of Iran. And this attitude did not change with Mossadegh. The Iranians, loving their king, opposed Mossadegh, and when Mossadegh called the army to restore order, the army instead ousted him. Mossadegh supporters often claim that thousands of Iranians were bribed by foreigners to demonstrate against Mossadegh. But when we look at eyewitness accounts, we quickly find out the opposite. Sha'ban Ja'fari, often known as Sha'ban the Brainless, was an infamous street thug in Tehran. During the national uprising against Mossadegh, he was often regarded as a leader of street fights for the Shah. In an interview, he stated that he did not receive any bribes, but that he had revolted against Mossadegh because he loved the Shah, as we can see in this interview.
سوالی که من میکنم اینه که شما با اعتقاد و باور دنبال یه چیزی میرفتی یا منافع شخصی داشتی. لولیشو بهتون بگم، مثلا پول بهتون میدادن که این کارا رو بکنید. ما همیشه خانم لخ بودیم و شهروان پامون نداشتیم از هیچ کس سر نداشتیم. نه خب ما می‌دونستیم که امروز مصدق میخواد شاه رو مملکت بیرون کنه. ما خب دوست داشتیم شاه رو. می‌گفتیم بریم نذاریم بریم. ولی کسی بیاد به ما پول بده ما رو تحریک.
And so, from 6 o'clock in the morning of August 19th, groups of people took to the streets and the uprising of the people in the capital against the Mossadegh government began. All strata of the population participated in the uprising. Workers, artisans, peasants, students, but also soldiers and policemen, the imperial guard and women. In a fever of patriotism, people occupied the radio station and then took strategically important centers and government offices. One government institution after another was taken over by the people. And when the radio office was occupied by the people, the victory of the people was announced by playing the royal anthem and the voices of Mir Ashrafi and Peyraste. The people's representatives in the parliament were heard on the radio. The message was clear. The representatives of the Iranian people were behind the Shah and the legal Prime Minister Zahedi. Mossadegh's interior minister, Dr. Sadiqi, went to Mossadegh's house on Wednesday morning, August 19th, at about 7 a.m. Mossadegh told Sadeghi that since the Shah had left the country, a royal council should be formed through a plebiscite. Sadeghi relayed this to the ministers, who informed him that people in Sepahskebwer were shouting slogans such as "Long live the Shah," "Death to the Tudeh party," and "Save the monarchy," demanding the Shah to return. General Riahi told Sadeghi by telephone that Mossadegh had expressed a desire to hand over the post of police chief and military governor to his nephew and son-in-law, General Muhammad Daftari, for fear that the police forces would join the people. Sadeghi was again informed that hundreds of people were demonstrating against Mossadegh and his government in several places in the city with the participation of officers and soldiers. The entire nation had revolted against Mossadegh and they were shouting, "Long live the Shah." When asked by the Minister of Interior why they did not stop the demonstrators, Sadeghi replied that the authorities could no longer trust their own soldiers. The mayor of Tehran, Dr. Sayyid Mohsen Nasr, told the Minister of Interior that the people had attacked the city administration and that the soldiers were doing nothing. Some people also attacked the prisons built on Mossadegh's orders. Several were killed, but the innocent people who had been imprisoned by Mossadegh were freed. Ironically, the house of the popularly loved Mossadegh, which was also the seat of his government, was a military fortress constantly guarded by tanks. During the uprising, his house was continuously attacked by the people. Even though Mossadegh's guards shot at demonstrators without hesitation, killing several civilians. Not so much loved by the people, I guess. When Sadeghi arrived at Mossadegh's house around 3 p.m, he found other members of the Mossadegh government. Foreign Minister Fatemi was also there, who said that the most important thing was to maintain the radio station. However, Sadeghi countered that this was not easy because the army and police had joined the people. Mossadegh was very upset when he heard that the people had taken control of the radio station and that the imperial anthem was played on radio. So the people do not appreciate your attempt to turn Iran into a proletariat dictatorship? Oh gee, what a shame. Then General Riahi informed everyone in Mossadegh's house that the people have taken the main places of the city and occupied the radio center. It is good that you give the order to put down the resistance. Colonel Izzatullah Mumtaz, the commander of the mountain brigades in charge of guarding and defending Mossadegh's house, entered and told Mossadegh that the opposition was growing stronger and that they would win. At 6:40 p.m, Colonel Mumtaz came in again and said the 2 Sherman tanks, which are stronger than our tanks in front of the police station on Pahlavi Street, have been seized by the opposition. Continuous gunfire had now been heard for an hour between the Mossadegh troops and the opposition forces. After a few minutes, Brigadier General Fulatwand came in and said, "In the present situation, continuing the shelling of the opposition forces is futile and causes many civilian casualties and is therefore dangerous to your lives, gentlemen. Give the order to surrender." Mossadegh replies, "No. I will stay here no matter what." Fulatwand then said, "What have I done? I wish I had not accepted this role," and again demanded Mossadegh to surrender. Eventually, even Mossadegh's closest allies turned their backs on him, and Razavi, Shaigan, and Zirkzadeh issued a statement saying, "Dr. Mossadegh considers himself the rightful prime minister even though the forces of law and order disobey him and refuse to continue defending his house." But the shooting continued anyway, and Mossadegh's guards killed 41 people and wounded 75 others. Who is the bloodthirsty dictator now? The Shah who leaves the country to avoid a civil war, or Mossadegh who shoots at his own people to secure his power? After the uprising of the people of Tehran, other residents joined the uprising, and so the residents of the cities of Rasht, Esfahan, Kermanshah, Shiraz, Ahvaz also declared their loyalty to the monarchy and their willingness to martyrdom. After 12 hours of bloody clashes between the people in Tehran and the Mossadegh government, all ministries and government offices, military centers and barracks finally fell into the hands of the people and Mossadegh's home was finally stormed. Mossadegh, who had not accepted the people's resistance, jumped from the wall of his house into a neighbor's house and fled, but was arrested and imprisoned after spending several days in hiding. Very fit for a person who seems to be sick and keeps fainting in front of the camera, isn't it?
وقتی اومد که برنامه‌شو مجلس ارائه بده ما شروع کردیم به هیاهو کردن اونم رفت پشت تریبون و گوشا خودشو کر گرفت به داد و قال و حملات ما و بنا کرد خوندن برنامهش. ما دیدیم فریادا به جایی نمیرسه. من پیشنهاد کردم که این تخت جلو رو بکوبیم. این تخته هست که کار میز میکنه. بنا کردیم کوبیدن این تخته و باز اون بنا کرد خوندن، ادامه داد که چیز بشه. اول دفعه هم که ما متوجه یه موضوعی شدیم اونجا بود. مکی پلو من نشسته بود، آقای دکتر مصدق اونور. مکی گفت آقا غش کنید، دیگه کاری نمیشه کرد. یک دفعه دکتر مصدق غش کرد. هیچی، حالت غش و رعشه و اینا و بعد کریم پور خودش از تو تماشاچی انداخت با اینکه پدر ملت کشتن و اینا که مجلس تنفس بشه.
Yes, the national resistance against Mossadegh was a popular uprising and the CIA was not aware that something like that was taking place. However, CIA agent Kermit Roosevelt also played a role in this popular uprising but was in fact disobeying orders as he was instructed to leave Iran after the failed coup attempt on August 16th and thus was acting on his own initiative. Having said that, Roosevelt merely played a minor role giving some help to organize the army. Roosevelt had absolutely no support from the US government and was disregarding the chain of command. He would have been probably executed by the US government for treason if the attempt had failed. To popular cheers, the Shah returned from his Iraqi exile and ordered the convening of a court to try Mossadegh for treason. The prosecutor requested the execution of Mossadegh for treason and undermining the constitution. Mossadegh was charged by the military prosecution to overthrow the imperial constitutional government with the following charges. Although Mossadegh was found guilty in all 13 cases, he was sentenced to only 3 years of house arrest. And this was because the Shah had told the court that Mossadegh should not be charged for his offenses against him personally. Evil Shah my ass. This is now the second time that the Shah has saved the life of Mossadegh, who had been accused of treason yet again. To sum it up, on the one hand we had the supporters of Mossadegh who wanted to overthrow the monarchy and establish a socialist republic. And on the other hand we had the Iranian people standing behind the Shah's constitutionally appointed Prime Minister Zahedi, who wanted to preserve their parliamentary monarchy. And therefore the people overthrew Mossadegh's government. As simple as that. No massive CIA involvement, no coup. So anyone, including almost all scientists in this field, who claim that the removal of Mossadegh was the result of Operation TP Ajax, must know that their claim is unequivocally unsubstantiated. I hereby take my leave. This was the Persian history. I hope you enjoyed it. If yes, share this video and leave a like. Thanks for watching. Until next time. And finally, I want to end this video with a speech of thanks from the Shah addressed to the Iranian people.
تحریکات ادامه داشت تا اینکه پادشاه شما برای اینکه پرده ها به عقب برود و قیافه حقیقی هر کس روشن بشود بهتر دانست که در غیاب خود او ملت ایران قضاوت خودش را بکند و شما مردم در 28 مرداد قضاوت خود را به اون طریق نشان دادید. و میخواهم بگویم که نه فقط خواستار مراجعت پادشاه قانونی موروثی خود بودید بلکه یک رسالت تاریخی اضافه بر آن به من دادید که منجر به انقلاب 6 بهمن شد.